And I understand in one of your programs, I believe, Dr. Duke, you were saying that there was a fourth grade teacher, I believe, in Texas, reporting that 63% of the students were LGBTQA plus. They keep adding all these letters to these gender choices, and that is just staggering. And what do you make of this? And
well, it's one of the things to think about, again, social emotional learning, which really gave rise under the aegis of Common Core. Think about what that means. Again, they've gotten to the point where they're not even trying to hide what they're doing anymore. Common Core was a blunt statement. We're going to teach your kids like commoners, not like a collective. Your kids aren't individuals anymore. We're going to teach them as common. You mentioned it, the lowest common denominator. But what really, if you stop and think about it, based on what Alex was just telling you, social and emotional learning is cultural scoring, right? Like we see in China, cultural credit. If you believe the right things and support the right leftist causes and are vocally opposing the right things like free markets and liberty, your social credit rises, right? In places like China, where the government deems you a better risk or a worse risk, the higher your progressive credit score, the less they have to monitor you. Well, that's what social and emotional learning is, right? It's sizing you up, measuring your commitment, your reliability when it comes to the one-sided monolithic progressive narratives you're getting. And the more you buy it, the more your social credit rises. The more the less likely you are to be stuck on ADHD medicine, for instance, that kind of thing that we're going to punish and medicate the kids who aren't sociologically with us, is exactly what's happening in China right now with the cultural credit score. And that's kind of what's happening in your public schools, as Alex so correctly identified.
Right. And it's such a global thing, as I understand, like with Common Core, wasn't one of the goals that no matter what country you're in, all the classrooms are going to be following the same curriculum that would be, just like the same thing throughout the world.
This is globalism. This is global socialism, is
yes.
What this is at every front. And you can't ignore the global. And what's really frustrating is that because of negligence and apathy and inaction on the part of people who should have known better, where has the Republican Party been vis-a-vis education? Because we know the Democrats generally march in lockstep about this kind of stuff. The Republicans there've been more Republican presidents in my lifetime than Democrats, and yet this goes sailing through when you've got Republican presidents too. But the big problem here, and it's a huge problem, is that we are so far down the ladder with this that everybody thought the Soviet Union was done when the wall came down in the 1980s. We're at the point now where the only thing that global socialism has to do is just tie together the gains that they've made. You look at the American school system right now, public school system, it is a global socialist's dream. You're telling me you're calling every aspect, the entire aspect of American history now, the growth of liberty, the growth of opportunity, the fact that human rights, civil rights, gay rights, women's rights, all originated out of Western culture. Now that's been completely written away, right? Nothing but racism and hate. And so our kids now are intellectually, emotionally, even to some degree, spiritually calibrated, not to what's gone on in this country actually for the last 2,000 years and Western culture, but what's going on in socialist mindsets. They're already groomed to have the education, to have the worldview, to have the attitudes of global supremacists, right? Global socialists. So all you need now is the cultural change to switch the government. And make this point all this time. Why is it, for the first time since the late 1960s, why are college kids now in the street rioting? Because that's who Antifa is, right? Why are these college kids, these who are at the pinnacle of our education scheme, why now are they engaging in violence? Well, if you taught me, I think it's true for Alex or you, if we taught you what we're teaching our kids, if you learned from the moment you started going to school that America was responsible for all the evil in the world, that slavery and imperialism were exclusively white male problems, that the rest of the world has been victimized by white men, if you heard that for year after year after year, from kindergarten all the way through high school, you'd hate your country too. And you would be very likely to get into the streets and start pulling it down if that's the only narrative that has been presented to you.
And I think that's coming from classrooms too. I believe I read that there are many teachers who are members of Antifa. Is that something that you understand?
Well, I don't know if they're actually card-carrying Antifa members, but they are 100% supportive and bringing into the classroom propaganda from Black Lives Matter. And don't forget, the two females who founded Black Lives Matter were trained, in their own words, by Weather Underground communists, right? If you take a look at the globalist agenda of Black Lives Matter, you'll only find a handful of things that have to do with race. Among the other things, Black Lives Matter is committed to getting rid of the nuclear family. Now, I don't know how that's going to help race at all, but one thing they want to do is get rid of nuclear families, just like the globalist environmentalists want to get rid of the nuclear family. So mom, dad, and ask yourself, think about the history of African-American families since the 1960s, right? The highest divorce rate up to of any or non-marry rate of any race in this country. The highest abortion rate is for Black women aborting Black babies since the Civil Rights Act. And you're telling me that Black Lives Matter wants to see even less parental control? They want to get rid of the nuclear family altogether? This has nothing to do with race. This ties much more dramatically into these global narratives about socialism and revolution.
Wow. It's just, I'm just, both of you have been speaking about this publicly for years. And I'm wondering, what type of reception are you getting when you're out there speaking? Like Alex, you've been very active with Red Pill Expo. And when you're talking about this, are people just tuning out? Or you're probably kind of talking to the choir there when you're at Red Pill. But I'm thinking, how come this is happening? And even, Dr. Pesta, with Common Core has been in place. I understand so many teachers hate it. And even some of the originators of the curriculum aren't all that much in favor of it. How do you think it's the UN? Because it kind of come from UNESCO? Is that why we still have it in our schools after how long? Going on 15 years or so? I probably asked too many questions, but I think they're all kind of related.
Go ahead, Alex.
Well, we are moving very quickly to a global education system. Before he started pumping money into Common Core, Bill Gates was actually over at UNESCO headquarters, and he signed an agreement with them. The late Phyllis Schlafly got a copy of this agreement and posted it online. He agreed that he was going to help create global standards, global curriculum, global teacher training programs, and global technology standards to be used in education around the world. And that's exactly what he did. In fact, if you look at some of the marketing and propaganda tools that Bill Gates funded to promote Common Core, they actually brag that it's aligned with international standards and that now children in Shanghai will be making the same progress as children in Chicago. So there is, I think, a growing awareness that something's very wrong. Unfortunately, the awareness is woefully inadequate. But we have seen, I think, a sea change in public attitudes to the government school system. I think even just in the last couple of years, we've seen a massive, massive exodus out of the government's brainwash camps. So the number of homeschoolers more than doubled in just 1 year, from summer of 2020 to summer of 2021. That's according to the U.S. Census Bureau. We've seen some of the most prominent leaders in the world urge parents to get their children out of public schools. Franklin Graham, one of the top evangelical leaders in the world, actually on Todd Starnes' show, urged parents to get their kids out of public schools and put them into safer schools. He was referring in particular to a law in New Jersey that had passed mandating LGBT indoctrination of every child in the public schools. We saw Rush Limbaugh multiple times before he passed away. Top radio host in America, 18 million listeners on average a day, urge his listeners to remove their children from the government's brainwash camps. And that's exactly what parents have been doing in huge, huge numbers. Unfortunately, I think there's going to be another battlefront opening up here very soon. In fact, it's already open. It's just even people on our side haven't yet realized what's going on. And that is the battle over control of homeschooling and private schools. We're seeing now all across the country this effort to start showering tax dollars on private schools and homeschoolers To their credit, the big homeschool organizations are all fighting this tooth and nail. The Homeschool Legal Defense Association, with hundreds of thousands of members, to say, no, we don't want your tax money. Keep your mitts off of our homeschools. Thank you very much. But a lot of well-meaning conservatives even have been roped into this because, well, hey, it's not fair that I have to pay taxes to brainwash other people's kids. Why don't I get some tax money to teach my own kids? And that's an appealing argument. The problem is where it's going to lead is total control of private schools. And I think that's one reason why Freedom Project Academy has never taken one penny of government money, because with government, and my dad always used to say this when I was a kid, referring to himself, but he'd say with federal aid comes federal control. And what he meant was, I'm paying your bills. You live under my roof. Therefore, you need to obey me. But the truism is just as applicable to actual government aid and involving actual government control. So we do have a shift in attitudes. People are leaving the school system. Even the people who are still trapped there, almost universally regarded as problematic. The teachers now realize something is very wrong, but we have a long way to go. So I'm thankful to see some of the developments that we're seeing, but this is maybe too little, too late. I hope not, but it looks like it.
And by the way, just in the news today, Joe Biden is planning a massive assault on charter schools. Alex and I have been talking about this for 10 years. Everybody's coming out, well, my kid goes to a charter school. This is wonderful. Man, this is a very dangerous thing. Biden said today that if he can get this passed, this new legislation he wants to see go through, public schools must approve charter schools before they're allowed to be created. And they must use the public school curriculum. This is the new, everybody thought that charter schools were going to be able to be safe, independent. As Alex just said, almost every charter school in the country takes state or federal money. That means it's whenever the state or the federal government decides, okay, you've built up quite a following. You've got a huge pupil base because you're teaching classical education. Well, you're getting your education math money for us. You're getting your government lunches from the U.S. Department of Education. So heretofore, you will change. And so they're already coming after and trying to close those loopholes down, right? I think Alex makes a good point. As far as the public schools we're talking about, you can't save them. How do you get inside of them? At what level does the left not control them? I mean, even when Donald Trump was president, the consummate outsider, he appointed to the Department of Education, the Secretary of Education under Trump was the woman who was responsible for Jeb Bush's Common Core program. Jeb Bush, you may remember, is the first Republican he was much more vocal about it than most Democrats. Betsy DeVos was on his campaign chair to look over Common Core, and if he were to get elected president, to help further it, not remove it. And that's the Trump administration. So there's no way to get inside this public school system unless you walk away. If Alex mentioned 60, 70 million of public school kids, I promise you this September coming up, say 400,000 moms this coming fall, or let's make it around 1 million. If 1 million moms and dads this fall had their kids enrolled in schools, and then the day the classes started, they walked their kids out of that school, that would begin to force change. If you could get 5 million of the 60, 70 million to just step back for a year, they would have to reform, because the one thing they crave more than all this control is the money that they keep wallowing in. It's the money that allows them to do this. But there would need to be a significant walkout before the schools would change. And we're not anywhere near to close to that happening yet.
I think you're right that we need a big boom for them to think, oh my gosh, this can't happen. What can we do? And they have to scramble. But, so I would say gone are the days where we could hope to get any sort of remedy by speaking before school board meetings anymore, that, they're part of the system, their hands are tied, and it just seems ridiculous. But if I could quote the late John Taylor Gatto, who I'm sure you're all familiar with, I thought this was really strong. He said, "School is like starting life with a 12-year jail sentence where bad habits are the only curriculum truly learned." And how is it, and that was his quote, and I'm asking, how is it that they can get away with all these bad policies causing harm to our children? I know we've been kind of covering that, but I just kind of like drive home that point. How can they keep doing this to our precious children?
This is when Alex started off this talk telling you that this was never a good idea. It was never a good idea to have a public school system. Even worse than the curriculum, even worse than the stated objectives of the people who created it, is the argument that we see today. I mean, you have now for 100 years conditioned moms and dads to have 8 to 10 hours of freedom every day. It's not an accident that we require 2 family members working in this in economy, right? Mm-hmm. No longer can dad go to work and mom stay home with the kids. Now, this is not an accident. Mm-hmm. So perhaps even more dangerous and more, at least sociologically more dangerous than the bad curriculum is the fact that we now believe that somehow some stranger with a 4-year degree in education and an anti-American attitude is much more qualified to educate your kids than we are. We believe that now. We can't do it. We need, and if you know anything about education degrees, they are the most empty degrees you could possibly get because there's no there. I mean, your kid wants to be a high school English teacher. They send them to the English professors for that part of the education. All they're getting in the education department is this raw sociological dialectic. It's just bad arguments. So I think, as we said before, you asked the question, how could we let this happen? How did we get here? It's because we think that public schools are free, number one. We don't realize how much we pay for them. And number two, we can't imagine a world in which we would have to be responsible for our kids' education. That seems outrageous to moms and dads today. Somebody else is responsible for my kids' education, not me.
Wow, you guys have just given so much. This has been, and I think we're still just scratching the surface, but I do believe that this will give a lot of thought for parents and be very helpful. I certainly hope so. Any last words, Alex, before you head off today?
Well, I just would like to urge parents again, if you have kids in the public school system, treat the building like it's on fire. Do everything you can to immediately get your children out of there before the damage is irreparable. Drop all other considerations. Don't worry about the money. Don't worry about, how you're going to do it. You figure those things out after you get your child out of the fire. That's the most immediate concern. I just hope parents will take this real seriously because I can't tell you how many moms and dads and grandparents have cried in front of me as I've gone across the country talking about this. I said, I wish I had known this before I sent my child to a public school. And now my kid is an addict, is getting abortions, hates America, hates me, won't talk to me, is a transgender. It's devastating. It's heartbreaking. And I don't want anybody else to go through that. So only you can stop it, mom and dad. And now would be a good time to do it.
It's clear there's a plan, right? I'm going to give you 2 quick examples. Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, has passed a bill that is hugely controversial now. And all that bill says is that we're going to protect kids from 3-year-olds to 3rd graders, right? We're talking 3-year-olds to 7-year-olds. And we don't want any sexuality education in the classroom for kids between the ages of 3 and 7. Now, anybody who thinks about it that way is staggeringly obvious. Of course, we've never in the history of the world educated 5 and 6 and 7-year-olds about sexual topics. So all the governor says is let's stop that. He never said you can't say gay. He never said that after the age of 3rd grade that you couldn't have sex education. We're going to go back to a system that protects children. And you can see how Biden and the entire federal government now of Democrats is completely fighting this. They're threatening the state of Florida with civil rights legislation. Now along comes Biden. What did he do last week? He is calling for actual surgeries and hormone therapies for children of any age. This is the response from the federal government. Not only are we going to lie about what Governor DeSantis did, we're going to lie and say this is an anti-gay bill. It's not. And now you're trying to pass legislature to revoke this. Not only will we talk about this stuff with your kids, but the public schools will become places where they can get not just hormone therapy in 3rd grade, but maybe even irreversible sex change operations to some degree for the youngest children. I mean, this is not some mainstream left-wing group. This is the federal government of the United States, underwritten by the Department of Education of the United States, who is both attacking the preservation of little kids' innocence and trying to substitute surgery and hormone therapy for those little children. And that was the first one. And the second one, this is in the news right today, April 11th, 2022. We have actual film. A first grade teacher tells kindergartners, quote, "When babies are born, the doctor looks and makes a guess on whether it's a boy or girl." This now, anti-science, anti-truth, complete made-up garbage this is what happens if you don't have a bill like DeSantis's, right? You've got first grade teachers teaching kindergarten kids, 5-year-olds, that when doctors examine a baby, they are just guessing on what that baby's gender is. This is pretty serious, if you ask me.
Yeah, I have no words. Wow. Alex, do you have any thoughts you'd like to share on that question?
Yeah, I agree with Duke. I mean, even the idea that this would somehow, even the idea that we need a law to tell these maniacs not to teach our children that they might have been born in the wrong body before they're 10 years old. It shows you how far gone the system is. A few years ago, it never would have occurred to anybody that we needed a law to do that, because it never would have occurred to anybody that somebody might try to teach our children that they needed to remove their genitals to be a new gender. This is how rapidly we have descended here. And we're on a collision course with absolute disaster. These are just the symptoms of the problem. And, I hate to go along with the whole systemic argument, but we have a systemic problem here, and it's not systemic racism. It's the government school so-called system that is the problem.
Absolutely. And I have a remaining question, if I may pose it, just wanting to ask your opinion, and I'm sure we already know, but to just chat a little bit about drag queen story hours in libraries and schools. And apparently there's a kids' summer camp in Seattle focused on turning 12 to 18-year-olds into drag queens. It's called Dragtastic Summer Camp, The Art of Drag, and it's sold out for $400 a pop. Do you see this trend as an offshoot of the LGBTQ ABC program being pushed in schools?
I do. I think it's all related. Don't forget that these are moms and dads who are gleefully signing your kids up for this. Yeah. I think I have a kind of unique take. At least I've never heard anybody argue what I'm going to argue. Stop and think about this for a second. Why did we decide to bring transvestites into 5-year-old kids' classrooms? You want to know why? Because you wanted to groom them in mainstream radical homosexuality. But here's the thing. If at age 5, you just brought the gay banker down the street in to talk to the kids would not be able to discriminate, to figure out what the difference was between the gay banker and the straight teacher. And same thing with transgenderism. If what you wanted to do is mainstream for 5-year-olds transgenderism, get the transgender volleyball coach at the local high school to come down and sit next to you. The problem, simply by looking at you, a little 5 or 4-year-old can't tell any difference. Right. So what do they do instead? It's a clown circus, right? You bring these men in, most of whom are not gay or not transgender. You bring these guys in who get all sexually dolled up in literally clown makeup with incredibly revealing clothes to gyrate sexually in front of little kids. Now that they'll forget, right? That they won't forget. So it shows you how dishonest it is. Little kids will never notice in a million years the difference between a gay or a straight person unless you forced it on them. And so what do? You bring these super sexualized men, these transvestite, to sort of gyrate and squirm in ways that those little 5-year-old kids can never forget. That, my friends, is the definition of grooming.
And abuse.
Yeah.
Yep.
And to add just a little bit to that, I think it shows you that the indoctrination is working. when I went to school in the 1990s, there was no such thing as this gender confusion among children. I lived in 8 different countries on 4 different continents. I grew up with every kind of kid you could ever possibly imagine. Hindus, Buddhists, Shintos, Jews, Christians, every color, every creed, everything. And never once in my entire childhood, out of all the thousands of kids that I grew up with, I never met one who was confused about his or her gender. The word transgender wasn't even in the dictionary until pretty recently. And yet now, if you look at the data, at least the purported data coming out of these universities and these surveys, the UCLA in California said that back in 2017, that now 1 in 4, in fact, more than that, 27% of children were now gender nonconforming, androgynous, non-binary, all this kind of madness. Even in conservative states, like in Utah, I reported for Freedom Project using the state government's database on medical prescriptions. They've had a 10,000% increase in the number of minor girls. We're talking, little girls ages below 18 who are now going through what they call this gender affirming transitions, whatever, what used to be called a sex change, which of course is not possible. So there's a radical spread of this that would have been inconceivable without all this indoctrination in the public schools. Yeah, Hollywood and the perverts at Disney play the role of like air support to kind of come in and solidify that. But the real root of where this is coming from is in the public school systems. The fact that it's become so normalized that they could sell out a whole show on this in Seattle for $400 a pop. It just shows you how effective this brainwashing is. They've had 100 years to study psychological conditioning, behavioral conditioning, programming of children to the point now where they have mastered it. And if we don't get this under control, it's only going to get significantly worse from here.
Absolutely. And I noticed the other day that our Colorado congressional representative, the Lauren Boebert, she grilled the Secretary of the Health and Human Services about the term birthing members or something. You may have heard about that, but he was just dancing around the subject. She came right out and said, who is a man? Can men have babies? And he just did his best to try to make her seem ridiculous. And
the next Supreme Court justice of the United States
yes,
cannot define what a woman is.
She's not a biologist, right?
That's right. And if you're a biologist who describes a woman as a functioning female, they're going to try to cancel you from biology. That's how bad it's gotten.
And I heard on one of your shows, Duke, just recently, I believe you were talking with Katie, and you said, well, I don't know, we can't talk about a woman, but I guess I can. You said if I live to be 91, I can be male for 90 and 1 for whatever other gender I want to be. Why do you have to commit to a gender?
Well, you don't. That's the thing. In other words, gender, what they're trying to argue is that's not just gender that is what you say it is, but it's biological sex. That's the problem. This is the way I like to phrase it. This is where we are in 2022. There's no such thing to the left as an actual man or a woman. They don't exist. It's purely theoretical. There's no such thing as a pure man or a pure woman. But there's hundreds of genders between man and woman that you damn well better believe in, or else it could cost you your career. So that which we know to be true, male and female, is a phantom. But all those made up genders, you better take them as if they were scientifically underlined, or else your career is on the spot.
Yes, and as you probably heard, that she came right out and asked him, Javier if she said, how about parents who believe in only 2 genders? Are we at risk and having our children taken away from us? And she said, are our tax dollars going to fund the mutilation of children whose breasts are being cut off and boys' genitalia are being removed? This mutilation, this gruesome mutilation. And he just kind of danced around that as well. And oh my gosh.
Well, and that should let you know, too. Maybe that's a good place to stop. We are telling you exactly what's going on. They're the ones who believe it. And when you put them on the spot, they can't quite commit to saying it publicly. If the new Supreme Court justice, if she actually came out and said, okay, I do believe as a woman is this, then it wouldn't have been the right wing canceling her. The left would have canceled her. She knew that if she gave a biological definition of herself, she would lose the entire support of all the left wing senators. And so rather than tell the truth of what they believe, they won't even answer the questions. I mean, we're telling you, we're putting everything in front of you. They're the ones who are doing this in the schools. And then when you get them on the hot spot, even they won't commit to it.
Exactly. And I understand she's soft on pedophilia. And I understand that pedophiles are now being called MAPs, minor attracted persons or something like that, to make it not be so offensive.
Well, my last comment will be this. This is the next thing. You want to know what's coming next? It's going to be the sexual emancipation of your kids. If the public schools have the right, and they're doing it, to teach your kids, even in elementary school, how to engage in sex, what sex is, how liberating sex is, that they don't have to listen to their parents when it comes to sex. If the public schools are already teaching the kids this, then the public schools, the next move is, you're not going to tell those kids in third grade, you can do this, but you got to wait till you're 18. What's going to happen is the public schools, at the expense of the parents, will begin to start telling children that age is meaningless when it comes to sex. If it feels good and no one gets hurt and it's who you are, you should be allowed to have sex with people of any ages. That's going to be the next big thing.
Absolutely. And yes, and there's just so much more I'm going to be sharing, but I wanted to thank you again, Alex and Dr. Duke, for spending the time you did with us today. This has been just so rich. And after a short edit, that this will be posted on my YouTube channel, Zips Media. And those who subscribe to my channel will receive a notice when it's ready. But we'll be adding a little bit more to it. And thank you all for being with us today. This was just been, I was hoping we could end on a light note, but I think the light note would be it's your choice. It's your decision. Do your own homework, make up your own mind what is in the best interest of your children and your family. And we're going to be following with part 2 about how to start a homeschooling co-op in your community. And going to be bringing in some folks who are really skilled in this area. So hopefully that'll be a positive note to end on as well.
Thank you.
So thank you so much. Bye for now.
Good to see you.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.